Hello, students. We're beginning a new unit today. Our unit is going to be on responding to reading. As you read any kind of literature or text throughout the course of the year, there will be an expected way for you to respond to that literature or text. This unit is going to help you to learn those expectations so that when you respond, you always respond in a great professional way to your teachers. The three types of responses that we will spend time on include what we call a literal response, an inferential response, and a reflective response. Today, though, our main focus will just be on the literal. Literal responses are really the easiest ones because the answers are right there for you, right in the text. You've just read it. So you would read a question and you would be able to point to the answer of that question, highlight it, underline it right in the text. There's no guessing involved. One thing, though, that we always want to do is structure our responses the same way. So whether this is a literal response or a reflective or an inferential, any type of response that you give to us, we want you to do three things. We want you to restate the question, use a complete sentence, and include correct punctuation and capitalization. So remember those three things anytime you respond. Let's start with a small passage from Gary Paulson's book, Hatchet. But it meant nothing to Brian, except that he wished he had a fire. He saw a grocery sack on the table next to Terry. Brian thought it must contain hot dogs, chips, and mustard, and he could think only of food. There are two questions in regards to this passage, and both of these questions are literal. The reason is because the answers to the questions can be highlighted or underlined and found directly in the text. We actually want you to highlight the answers in the passage. Are the answers literally there? Can we highlight them? So let's look at the first question. What did Brian wish that he had? So if I go back up into the passage, I can see that Brian wished that he had a fire. When I go to respond to this question, I would restate the question in the form of a response. Brian wished that he had a fire. So I am restating the question. What did Brian wish that he had? Brian wished that he had. I'm answering the question and I'm putting it in the form of a sentence, which is what we want you to be able to do. Put it in the form of a complete sentence. Use capitalization and punctuation at the end. We also want you to remember to highlight the information in the passage, the answer. So let's go to the second question. What did Brian think that the grocery sack contained? So I'm going to go back up into my passage and I'm going to look for the response to that question. He's right here. He saw a grocery sack on the table next to Terry. Brian thought it must contain hot dogs. Well, here we go. Hot dogs, chips, and mustard, and he could think only of food. So let's respond to that question. What did Brian think that the grocery sack contained? Brian thought that the grocery sack contained, here we go, hot dogs, comma, use our comma in a series, chips, comma, and mustard. Put your period at the end, and there you go. This is exactly what we're looking for with a literal response. Good practice. We are now going to read an article titled Moonwalking. We're going to read the article first, then we are going to answer questions that require a literal response. Here we go. Imagine going on a trip 242,000 miles away. That's what Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, two American astronauts, did on July 20th, 1969. They flew all the way to the moon. Buzz and Neil landed their spacecraft, the Eagle, on the moon's surface in a place called the Sea of Tranquility. And then Neil went out for a little walk on the moon. Another astronaut, Michael Collins, flew in a small spacecraft called the Columbia 70 miles above the moon and waited for Neil and Buzz. The moon has no air. Temperatures are extreme. It is very hot in the summer and very cold in the shade. So Neil had to put on a spacesuit to protect him from the hot and cold temperatures. The suit had oxygen for Neil to breathe and a fan to keep his body cool. The visor of his helmet had tiny lamps on the sides because it can be dark in space. That sounds really interesting. When Neil Armstrong stepped off the Eagle that day, he was the first person to leave a footprint on the moon. Buzz and Neil did 3 experiments and packed up moon dust and rocks to bring back to Earth. Then they climbed back into the Eagle. Buzz and Neil took off from the moon in the top half of the Eagle. They hooked onto the Columbia spacecraft where Michael was waiting. After Neil and Buzz climbed back into the Columbia, the Eagle detached from the lunar module and crashed back to the moon's surface, where it probably still is today. The 3 astronauts all flew back to Earth. The 2 men stayed on the moon for 21 hours and 36 minutes, not quite a full day. 2 years later, in 1971, Alan Shepard walked on the moon too. Later that year, astronauts drove on the moon with the lunar rover, which had a top speed of 8 miles per hour. Whoosh! It's a good thing they didn't have to drive the lunar rover to the moon. It would have taken them 7 years round trip. Just to take note, this is the title of our article. This is a text feature, an image, that helps us better understand what we're reading. Astronaut Pete Conrad walked on the moon in November of 1969, and there's a picture of Pete Conrad on the moon. It's time to answer some questions about our article Moonwalking. Let's start with the first question. On what day did Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin fly to the moon? So we're looking for a day in which they flew. If I go back into my article, in the very first paragraph, I am going to look for the answer to that question right here. Imagine going on a trip 242,000 miles away. That's what Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, 2 American astronauts, did. When did they do it? On July 20th, 1969. They flew all the way to the moon. So let's start with the answer to that by restating the question and then putting the answer in the form of a complete sentence. So we can say Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin flew, notice the change in verb tense, to the moon on, and here comes my answer, July 20th, 1969. Now, let's reread what we wrote and make sure that it makes sense and that it follows everything that we're being asked to do. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin flew to the moon on July 20th, 1969. That sentence sounds good. So we'll move on to the next sentence. Here we go. Who flew the spacecraft Columbia? So after having read the article, I'm going to scan down a little bit until I find information about the astronaut who flew the Columbia. And I can see that the information is right here. It appears that an astronaut by the name of Michael Collins flew in a small spacecraft called the Columbia. I'm highlighting that in my text to prove that evidence exists that I know that it was Michael Collins. And now I am going to go through and respond to that question on my form, on my sheet. So, who flew the spacecraft Columbia? Let's restate that. The spacecraft Columbia was flown by Michael Collins. Now, is there a different way that you could respond to that? Sure, an alternative to that would be Michael Collins flew the spacecraft Columbia. See, there's more than one way to answer as long as you put it in the form of a sentence and restate the question. Good job. Okay, let's go to number 3. Who was the first person to leave a footprint on the moon? So, as I read the article, I did find it interesting that there was a man who stepped on the moon for the first time after leaving the Eagle. This is why it's important to be an attentive reader. But if you can't remember, you can always go back and reread the article to find the answer. So what I see towards the bottom of my page is that Neil Armstrong, right here, you can see that I'm highlighting this in yellow, flew the Eagle that day, and he was the first person to leave a footprint on the moon. That's the answer to my question. So now I'm happy. Very, very happy, haha. And I'm going to go over and I'm going to go ahead and respond to this. So, restating this, the first person to leave a footprint on the moon was Neil Armstrong. Notice I have punctuation. Notice that I've capitalized. Let me reread that, make sure it makes sense. The first person to leave a footprint on the moon was Neil Armstrong, and it makes sense. So this is how we would like you to respond each time you do any kind of work for us and respond with a literally, where the information is directly found in the text. We have one more question, but we're going to do this question a little bit differently. The last question is an exit assessment, and we are going to use that as a way to determine that you understand how we want you to answer literal questions. So you want to do a really good job with this. The question is, who walked on the moon in 1971? And you're going to go back and read that article or look at that article again. There's a PDF actually of the article in your Schoology folder. So you can go back and reread it and find the answer to that question, who walked on the moon in 1971. Then you are going to answer this question in the form of a discussion prompt, which we haven't done yet this year, but I'm going to give you some direction on right now. So there is going to be an assignment in your Schoology folder, and it's going to say moonwalking literal response question number 4. You've got some little speak bubbles here next to that, little chat bubbles. Open that, and what you will see next is this right here. So in step 2, when you open it, you're going to have 2 sides to this page. It's going to have the question, and it's going to have the title and the question down below. It's going to ask you to use what you've learned in the lesson to respond, but this is the information about it. But if you go to the other side, that's what you're going to select when you're ready to submit it. So when you have an answer, you're going to select discussion. Okay? So what we're going to do is open up what you're going to see once you open discussion. You are going to see that there are no comments. It's going to say there are no comments. Now, what you want to do is go to the plus sign in the top right corner. Once you select the plus sign, you will be able to add a comment to this. So now, let's open this up. That's what it's going to look like. It's going to allow you to write a comment directly into this box. And then what you want to do is select attach. And that attach is going to put the comment into the discussion for everyone to see. So what we would like you to do is complete that question, okay? Respond to that prompt using the information from the article. And we want you to make sure that you are doing these three things: restating the question, writing a complete sentence, and punctuating and capitalizing. Now, this response is coming to us, and it is our way to say that you understand what we taught you today in this lesson, so it should be your very best response. All of these things need to be considered while you are responding. It should be proofread. Before you send it, proofread it like you saw me model for you. I always go back and reread my answer so that I know that it is going to be a good answer. At this time, you will not respond to other students. So although this is a discussion format, we are not looking for you to do any discussion. We are only looking for your response. Okay, so go ahead, go back into the article, find the answer to that question, respond to it through the discussion, make it your best response, and good luck.